Good afternoon, and welcome to our Monticello live stream with Bill Barker as Thomas Jefferson. Today, we're talking about Jefferson's formative experiences in the colonial capital of Williamsburg, Virginia, and at the College of William and Mary. Please post your questions for Mr. Jefferson in the comments and let us know where you're watching from.
Styles have changed. Indeed, they've changed when I occupied that great house behind me here. I occupied it as the last residing governor in the old governor's palace in Williamsburg, Virginia. When, of course, this was the hat I wore, not so much as governor, but I was also lieutenant colonel of Virginia militia. I understand that at this time, you all welcome this past weekend what you referred to as a Memorial Day, giving great reverence and never forgetting those who gave their lives in the founding of our nation and its continued protection, safety, and defense. Well, I played a part in that, as did so many others during the time of our American Revolution. And though I saw no battle, I did occupy offices of administration. Hats and styles change. I wore something similar to this when I was our chief magistrate. They referred to it as a wide brim or a top hat. That is what I wore. Of course, the fashion had already come into style during the 1790s. But perhaps some of you have read, as I have written, in matters of fashion, simply swim with the current, but in matters of principle, stand like a rock. So I'm delighted that we may gather here today and refer to the founding principles of our nation, particularly in which I played a part when our nation was getting started here in Williamsburg, Virginia, and in which so many of us played no small part. And I'm referring not so much to myself, but also to my colleagues, the late Colonel Patrick Henry, the late General George Washington, and many others. So let us engage in our questions today on my experience in Williamsburg during the 20 years when I first rode into town that winter of 1759 and 1760, and when I left town that spring of 1780. Ms. Holland, thank you for being with us to welcome the questions from all of us gathered here together. I look forward for the first.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to be here with you. So, Mr. Jefferson, can you tell us something about the atmosphere in Williamsburg when it was the colonial capital of Virginia, and about some of the prominent people who came together there in the years before the Revolution?
Williamsburg, Virginia was very much a capital of society, as it was a capital of education. I had reflected often in conversations with my grandchildren about Williamsburg, the Williamsburg I knew as a young boy. And I remarked to my grandson, Thomas Jefferson Randolph, that Williamsburg was a capital of hospitality, a capital of education, but most importantly, a capital to which many sought zealously their improvement and their enlightenment. Do you know that the average population in Williamsburg was upwards of about 2,500 souls during the majority of the year, except for market times? Twice a year at least, all of Virginia would come to Williamsburg, Virginia, in order to engage with the farmers who were welcoming their wares there in that city to sell, many of the sutlers who were coming there as well to proffer what they had to sell. The court would gather there, particularly the general court, that is the High Court, the former Supreme Court of the old colony of Virginia, would gather there. And the population would double and triple oftentimes during that year. And it was not only Virginians who were coming to Williamsburg, Virginia. Many from the cities of Philadelphia and New York. Many would come northwards from Charleston and Savannah. It was very much a center of trade and a center of society at that time, and it occupied a most strategic location. Williamsburg was on the high ground between the James River to the south and the York River to the north, so that many who were coming into the Chesapeake Bay and sailing up both of those rivers would find Williamsburg to be a center both of government, let alone of, well, of commerce and trade and society.
You mentioned earlier the year that you arrived in Williamsburg. Can you tell us a little bit about what took you there in the first place?
Good fortune. Oh, I cannot deny the opportunity, the privilege I had to pursue an education in the highest level as was offered in the old colony of Virginia. That is, to attend and enroll at the Old Royal College of William and Mary. It was because of the good fortune that my parents provided me. And I literally mean the means in itself. My father was deceased some years. He passed away quite suddenly in August of 1757. He was only 49 years old, and I but 14. And yet I was the eldest son in a family of 10 children. And so you could say that the British laws of primogeniture, first genitor family, the eldest son in the family, fell heavy upon my shoulders to inherit my father's estate. Now, father did have a will. He did not die intestate. And he provided in his last will and testament a choice unto his two surviving sons. Even at that time, 1757, I had 3 younger brothers. 2 of them died in infancy. And so my surviving brother was my youngest brother, Randolph. And so therefore, father, in his last will and testament, allowed a choice between the 2 of us as to who would choose which particular farms that they would be seated upon. Randolph, my younger brother, chose Snowden Farm, which is somewhat south of Monticello, and all of the farms they are northern in Albemarle County. Snowden is across the James River from Scottsville. On a high prominence is where Randolph's mansion house stood. I, of course, chose Monticello and Shadwell and Tufton and Lego and Pantops farms. But Randolph and I also held in common the legacy of an education provided as well by our father. And that was to continue our education by going to the Old Royal College of William and Mary. And so it was that opportunity, that privilege that brought me to Williamsburg that winter of 59 and 60 to be enrolled in the highest curriculum, which was the School of Mathematics and Natural Philosophy, presided over by an individual I can never forget, Dr. William Small, a Scot who had come there to teach very much the principles and the foundation of enlightenment. To be able to read under his tutelage the works of Locke, Newton, and Bacon prepared me well for the controversies that would ensue throughout the 1760s. In fact, I have written often about Dr. Small. I have said perhaps more than any other, he fixed my destinies.
So you had already pursued an education before you entered the College of William and Mary. Was it the custom in Virginia for young men to go to college as well?
Well, again, the custom depended upon the means. If your family had the means, well, then yes, it was customary, particularly for the elder sons to attend the highest curriculum at that time in Virginia, which was, of course, the Old Royal College of William and Mary. And you are correct. I had the privilege to pursue an education even before I enrolled at the Old Royal College of William and Mary. More or less an elementary curriculum was my privilege when I went to the old schoolhouse at Tuckahoe Plantation and was able to learn the elementary rudiments of an English education, reading, writing, common arithmetic, ancient history, modern history, Latin, and Greek. And then, of course, returning to Charlottesville, I was able to be enrolled at the Reverend James Murray's Classical Academy. That was conducted on the estate of Dr. Thomas Walker. And Murray's Academy was a wonderful place for boys to gather there, many who would live there, even as I did. It's some distance from Monticello. And to further their education in pursuit of reading French and Italian, and most importantly, natural philosophy, the realms of scientific investigation. So, and perhaps you're wondering, well, what about Randolph? What about my younger brother? Did he have the opportunity? Yes, Randolph did have the opportunity to pursue an education, and he did ultimately enroll at the Old Royal College of William and Mary. However, Randolph was far more interested in his fencing lessons and his dancing lessons, so after about a year, he was rusticated, meaning let's just say he left. And he went directly then to Snowden Farm and became quite successful in farming. So yes, the custom was a higher education could be guaranteed, an elder son in particular, if the family had the means, the monies in order to do so.
So what degree did you get at the College of William and Mary, or what did you study?
I've often been asked, what degree did I receive, particularly as I hope you know, along with several others, we are founding a university just down the road in Charlottesville to be open to further frontiers of scientific investigation and knowledge to be discovered. But while I was at William and Mary, it was hardly a university. William and Mary was a collegiate curriculum, and in that, you might think, somewhat parochial, somewhat narrow. In the School of Mathematics and Natural Philosophy, I studied moral philosophy, and I studied natural philosophy. The moral philosophy were realms, if you will, of the ancient writers and how they appealed to the moral sense of an individual. So Thomas Aquinas would be read accordingly in the medieval world. But then in the natural philosophy, that was the realm of science. That meant geography and geology and botany and zoology, all of those realms of science which we continue to perfect. I remember Dr. Small mentioning unto us, science is never perfect. We continue to pursue in order to perfect it. And that, of course, has allowed me to keep an open mind as I continue in my life. But you may think I'm avoiding the idea of a degree. I received no degree. There was not a degree offered at the Old Royal College of William and Mary for a student enrolled in the School of Mathematics and Natural Philosophy. That would not be until 1772, 10 years after I left the Old Royal College. Now, they did offer an Arts Magister, or a master's degree, you might call it, in the School of Divinity. Because remember, the Old Royal College of William and Mary was founded as a seminary of the Church of England. And so a young boy would be prepared with that Arts Magister over a period of 7 years' study in order to sail to England and there be ordained as a minister of the Church of England. Now, that was not so much my interest. And so, no, I did not graduate from college.
Well, David does ask, what was your favorite educational interest, if you had to pick one at the college in Williamsburg?
David, I would say that it is simply philosophy, the opening of one's mind to question everything, an open and free inquiry. As I mentioned, Dr. Small, he would gather us all in his classrooms, and at William and Mary, our classrooms were somewhat with the students sitting about the walls of the classroom. Dr. Small, though he could stand in the master's box, often would take his chair and sit in the middle of the room and simply go round about us asking questions, and we would answer it, and within the answers, other questions would emanate. And so in that regard, there was hardly a subject which did not interest me. In fact, ever since, I've said not a blade of grass grows uninteresting to me. So the realms of philosophy, the ancient philosophers, let alone the modern, amongst the ancients, well, Thucydides, Euclid. Many do not even think of Euclid as a philosopher. They think of him as a mathematician. But within the first few pages of Euclid's Geometria, you read that nothing can be surveyed, nothing can be given its parameters, nothing can be designed in geometry without first establishing a point. Well, do not all realms of study, do not all realms of human interest seeking to draw cosmos out of chaos begin with establishing a point? This is none the difference in beginning to establish a new nation, none the difference in beginning to establish even a political platform based upon a particular opinion of political economy. You have to establish the point, and all things to improve themselves must begin with a starting point. Now, amongst the modern philosophers, Locke, Newton, and Bacon, they remain the three foremost minds of the modern world. And I was introduced to all of those three there at the old Royal College of William and Mary by Dr. William Small. Now, what might I cite as the difference between those of the modern world and those of the ancients? I think that the ancients were often encumbered with trying to move forward, trying to progress, and feeling that they were wrestling with the gods, that the gods would not allow them to aspire to the heights where the gods were the most comfortable to stay occupied. But no, thank heaven, the modern authors, the modern individuals of philosophy believe that one of the greatest inspirations in philosophy is how can we make it better and how can we get there? And so as I referred to Sir Isaac Newton, well, imagine in his Principia, if we do not know a certain sum in a calculation, well, we simply insert a variable and continue to move forward. And think of John Locke, who states so clearly in his essays on government, volumes 1 and 2, his essay on human understanding, that no government anywhere will long survive unless the people realize that government receives its just powers to govern from the governed. You know, when I was at the the governor's palace behind me, when I occupied that palace, the escutcheon, the royal escutcheon of the royal family of Great Britain was still on the north end of the palace, touting, if you will, the motto of the royal family, Diu et man droit, God is my right. Well, it takes but common sense to realize that a monarch is not seated on the throne because of the opinion of God. In fact, how many monarchs have been seated who care not for the religious freedom of one of their subjects that they might worship as they choose? No, it is the people, we the people, who provide the purpose, and we the people who provide the power. So you see, philosophy can ground us decidedly and solidly in the founding principles of our nation, a government of, by, and for the people.
Well, Christine asks if you could speak to your daily life in Williamsburg. Did you take meals at a tavern or did you have cooking options? What kind of meals did you typically have and when did you eat?
Well, Christine, I will tell you this, would that I could have taken my meals in my own home in Williamsburg. And I did make an effort to establish that. Many people do not realize this. I actually bought a lot on South England Street with the hope that I could build a house upon it. South England Street, if you will, is almost directly from where I sit right here, right across down by the old Palace Green there, and then right across, if you will, Francis Street that divides, well beyond the Duke of Gloucester, right in front of us here, and then beyond Francis Street, past that. It is near where the old public hospital is, a bit to the west from it. But no, I never got about to building a house upon that lot. So you are correct, Christine. I did stay at various towns, taverns, that is, inns, ordinaries in Williamsburg. Of course, when I was a student at the old Royal College of William and Mary, I lived in the garret, that is the top floor of the old college building. And I took my meals there at the old Royal College, where all the boys would gather in the great hall, there in the midst of the grand portraits of Her late Majesty Queen Anne. And now I understand some portraits of, well, General Washington, a portrait of President Monroe, a portrait of President Madison, and even a portrait of me, and a portrait of the late Richard Blair. He was the founder, if you will. Many consider him the founder of the old Royal College, and they consider him the one to have brought the old Royal College back into its full preparation for the studies of young boys after the building had burned. In fact, I can tell you that in the portrait painted of Dr. Blair is a phoenix, that bird, the phoenix, rising from the flames. Now, when I would attend to Williamsburg in reading law, I lived with Mr. George Wythe at his house. That, of course, along the old Palace Green. In fact, it's just right over yonder. And I would live with him and take my meals there at his house in the company of Mr. and Mrs. Wythe, and prepared by their cook, Lydia Broadnax. And oh, she was a fine cook indeed, a very fine woman. I will always remember her, a dear, dear person who lived in the house while I was there reading law. Mr. Wythe would take a student for 3 years in reading the law. Do you know another of his students? Our Chief Justice, John Marshall. That's right, John Marshall, my cousin, read law with Mr. Wythe, lived right there at Mr. Wythe's house, and yet no two individuals could have more of a difference of opinion in the law than John Marshall and me. But I say that's a testament to Mr. Wythe's integrity to teach the foundation of the law and to realize that every generation has a right to argue and debate it. Now, which tavern would I enjoy to take meals when I was in Williamsburg? Well, I did live in a room, a back off, if you will, the main room of the Merchants Square Tavern. Merchant Square has a wonderful common room there. I hear it is still just as it was when I remember it. The original wood walls there are very, very sharply polished, and the room just off of that was where I would stay and then take my meals right there in the common room at the Merchants Square. I would also enjoy King's Arms. I cannot deny that. I would enjoy Mrs. Campbell's. So did General Washington. Of course, he was not general at the time when he would take many of his meals there. But as colonel, even when he was a young major of Virginia militia, he would enjoy Mrs. Campbell's. Mrs. Campbell was always renowned for cooking up the most delightful meals from the fruits of the ocean, if you will. Seafood was quite prominent at her house, at Christiana Campbell's Tavern. Now, I'm certain that I'm missing one, and that, of course, would not be very politic of me. Tunings was a very favorite tavern where I would take my meals as well. And so they are, I think I can tell you, are the taverns that I am presuming are still offering great fare and great society and hospitality in that capital of hospitality, Williamsburg.
Well, you talked a little bit about Mr. Wythe, but Chester had a question, and his specifically said, I've heard you've dined with Mr. Wythe and the royal governor.
Oh.
So why do you think you were singled out for these opportunities? And can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Chester, you bring back many fond memories. You're absolutely right. Can you imagine as a young boy from the wilderness, the forest primeval of Western Virginia, to be able to ride into a town so civilized and offering so much there, to attend the Old Royal College of William and Mary and be invited as a student at the Old Royal College, just down the road yonder, to be able to be invited here and attend suppers and soirees and musicales in the governor's palace. That was Governor Francis Fauquier. I have remarked he was probably the most able man to ever hold a seat of government, perhaps not only in Virginia, but in all of North America. He was a great supporter of the Foundling Hospital. He worked with Dr. Bray in establishing the Bray schools, particularly in Virginia, but also throughout the major cities in our former colonies, in New York and Philadelphia and Charleston and Savannah. And I often reflect not only upon the good conversation at those meals, but then the musicales that we would engage afterwards amongst ourselves. Dr. Small and Mr. Wythe, Governor Fauquier, and myself, party quare, we referred to ourselves. And I believe I heard more good common sense spoken during those party quares than perhaps I've heard in my entire life since, Chester. They were enlightening occasions, particularly influential for a young boy, and I've never forgotten them. And Chester, imagine, if you will, could I have ever thought at that young age, 17 and 61, 17 and 62, that near 20 years later, I would be sitting at the dinner table in the governor's palace as the governor of Virginia. That's truly American, is it not? Quite an American thought, a founding principle, if you will, that we may have the opportunity to be anything we aspire to be, to fulfill our capacity. that is inferred in our Declaration of American Independence. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Be everything you can be. Let us keep working at that for every individual.
So how were enslaved people part of the life in the colonial capital and your experience there?
Very much a part of the life. Good heavens. Traveling to Williamsburg, Virginia, I dare say that every other individual that was walking up and down the Duke of Gloucester Street anywhere throughout that town was either of color or enslaved. As I said earlier, it was a center of commerce. It was a center of trade. It was a center of society and the many who would follow society there. And of course, the many who had no choice but to follow society there. And not only throughout Virginia, but throughout all of the former colonies. I mean, the enslaved who would come down with their families, that is, whom they were following and engaged to serve, come down from Philadelphia, come down from Baltimore, come down from New York, even Boston, let alone the many who would be coming up from Charleston and Savannah. They were involved very much in seeking the purchases of the families they served there in Williamsburg. And not only that, but many would want to come to Williamsburg in order that they themselves might purchase something for themselves at some of the stores and the milliner's shop or what have you. No, one could never deny that the institution of slavery was certainly profound and prominent in Williamsburg, Virginia. And yet at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, think of Dr. Thomas Bray's effort to establish schools, as he did, the Bray schools up and down the East Coast, that there in Williamsburg, Virginia, was the opportunity for the education of young enslaved children, both male and female. And not only that, think as well of the Baptists who had come down from New England, bringing their freedom for religion in their religion, that the enslaved were very much amongst the first to take that up and to establish the first Black Baptist church here in our community. I hope history will never forget those two efforts there for the further enlightenment and the further freedom for those who had no choice otherwise in their lives, freedom for religion and freedom for their own enlightenment in Williamsburg, Virginia.
So you've spoken about your time in Williamsburg, both as a student at the College of William and Mary and some of your experiences there, but you kind of briefly mentioned going back to Williamsburg after college. For what other reasons did you return to Williamsburg?
Well, after those 2 years under the tutelage of Dr. William Small, I returned, of course, to read law with Mr. George Wythe. That was a period of 3 years. I was licensed in order to practice law January of 1766. That was when I left Virginia for the very first time, but 23 years old, to go to Philadelphia. Now, you speak of Williamsburg, indeed. Philadelphia was the largest city in all of North America, the largest British city in all of North America. And I went there purposely to be inoculated against the smallpox. So it was when I returned to Williamsburg that I began the practice of law. And I was licensed both to practice before the General Court, as I mentioned earlier, the Supreme Court of Virginia, there in the Capitol building in Williamsburg, and I was licensed to practice the county courts. That is, to ride on the circuit, a lawyer's circuit, all throughout Virginia and the various counties there, to practice at the hustings court, to practice at trials. Most of the cases, of course, that I practiced in the county courts were cases of caveats, that is, liens, you might say, that were put upon property if the supposed owner had not paid up the entire purchase price of that property they had patented. You see, remember, I'm the son of a surveyor, one of the most esteemed surveyors in all of Virginia. My father, Colonel Peter Jefferson, pursued many patents in his commissions. Those patents would then be deposited in the Public Records Office building in Williamsburg. So when you're down the street there at the east end of the Duke of Gloucester Street, and you're looking there at the Capitol, the building to the left, recessed back to the left, that beautifully built, double-walled brick building, was the old patents office, the old public records office, the secretary's office, you might say. And those walls were built double thick in order to preserve and protect those records of the former colony of Virginia. Remember, I said that the old Capitol building burned down. No, I said that about William and Mary. Well, so did the Capitol building in the 1740s. And so therefore, when they made an effort to rebuild the Capitol building, they made an effort to build the public records office building there. So if you will, many of the cases that were out on the circuit were people who placed caveats upon patents, thinking that the owner would not pay up the balance of the purchase price. Also, when you patented land, you had to build a dwelling on it at least 12 foot square within 2 years to show that you meant to establish and secure that patent and that land. So when you would ride the county circuits, you would realize that here were opportunities for people to acquire land that they had not originally patented. And if you could make a case for them, then all they would have to pay would be the balance. And at times, I will not deny, a good attorney who was familiar with surveying might know where choice land would be located out on the circuit, and he might pay the balance of that caveat. Now, in the general court, in the Supreme Court, that is where you would try and argue cases of property and a person. Presumed murders would be argued and debated there. Presumed claims to property in lineage would be argued there. So my cases, when I would meet there twice a year, were devoted to just that extent of the law. In fact, I still have my casebook of cases that I tried and argued in the general court, near 900 of them. There may be more. And won't that be something in the future, if that may survive, that people may understand distinctly what cases were argued and debated in the high court of the former colony of Virginia.
Arden asks, have you ever reflected back on what path your life would have taken had you not come to Williamsburg, met Mr. Wythe, and married the love of your life, Martha?
Arden, I declare, you certainly know one of the deepest intimacies of my entire life. You are correct. I met my future bride in Williamsburg. I do not refer to her often, but you brought back very fond and, as I said, deep memories. How would my life have turned out had I not met the former? Well, she was a single woman at the time I first set eyes on her, Miss Martha Wales, the eldest of the 4 daughters of Mr. John Wales, who lived about a day's ride west from Williamsburg, across the Chickahominy River in Charles City County, at his farm known as the Forest. Oh, she was pursued by quite a number of suitors, quite adept upon the spinet. I stood in line, but no, she accepted the hand of a classmate of mine at William and Mary, Mr. Bathurst Skelton, and yes, they were married, only for 2 years. Perhaps you know this, Arden. And Bat was killed in a carriage accident near Williamsburg. He was riding from Williamsburg to Jamestown when he was in that carriage accident. The widow Skelton went into seclusion. Customary at the time, 2 years, still is, even now. And I was in Williamsburg then. And yes, I had the opportunity to enjoy a musicale with the widow Skelton, and endeavored, if you will, a proposal to her. We decided we would marry 17 and 71 at the beginning of the year, but she had a little boy for Mr. Skelton, and we thought that Jackie Skelton would be a delightful part of our ceremony, but little Jackie passed away in 71, so we postponed our wedding for another year. We were married on the first of the year, 1772, at the Forest, Mr. Wales' plantation, and then we came to live out at the little mountain, Monticello. My life certainly would have not turned out the same had I not had that opportunity to go to Williamsburg. Even that very first year, the winter of 59 and 60, to attend the Royal College and to have seen the former Miss Martha Wales. My life, I doubt, would have turned out the same without that opportunity to have had Dr. William Small as my teacher, to have opened my mind at that young age, and to help me understand that you can enter easily every single day when you bear an open mind, and to continue to make education lifelong in that effort. Mr. Wythe, who taught me the foundation of English common law, its foundation in the ancient Roman jurisprudence, even beyond that, its foundation in the Justinian Code of Law, the first civil body of law, offered to civilized man in the 6th century. The fact that everyone is born free, everyone comes into this world with a right to their own person, right to their own person. Right there is the essential founding principle of our Declaration of American Independence and the establishment of our nation. And without the influence of Mr. Peyton Randolph, he was Speaker of the House of Burgesses when I entered as a young Burgess, sat down the first time in the spring of 1769. I had no idea that would be the beginning of 40 years in public service. But my mother's first cousin, Peyton Randolph, was of great influence. He was Speaker of the House of Burgesses. He helped me to understand that politics is a most noble profession. Politics is the art of compromise. He was a perfect example of that. I was to follow him to Philadelphia in that first Congress that convened September 1774. But I was ill. I could not go. But it was in that Congress that Peyton Randolph, the Speaker of the House of Burgesses in Virginia, there seated in Williamsburg, Virginia, was elected the first president and helped us all from those 12 colonies that were there. I say 12 because, lest we forget, Georgia was not represented in the first Congress in Philadelphia. That's September of 74. But Mr. Randolph helped bring us all together in an amelioration of differences of political economies, to bring us all together and reflect as one body upon the rights that we should have of Englishmen. And if we came away from that first Congress, and again, I wasn't there, but I heard everyone speak about it after the fact, particularly Speaker Randolph, that if there was any one thing that kept us together to go back for that second Congress convening in the spring of 75, it was that we had a right to continue to pursue petitioning for redress of grievances. And why? Told that this was our first and foremost right as Englishmen? Because we were not represented in Parliament. That was the crux of the whole matter. They say taxation without representation. The taxes were somewhat minimal. Everyone could afford to pay the taxes. It was the fact we had no representation. Everything was overseen by the royal prerogative, the royal authority, even what we might come up with in the old Virginia House of Burgesses meeting in the Capitol down the road here, the east end of the Duke of Gloucester Street. It could be vetoed by the royal authority, and the royal governor. The royal governor had the right to dissolve the representative body of the people as he should choose. So, Auden, here I am talking on and on and on as usual, but I suppose I cannot say enough about those early experiences that I had, so privileged to have in Williamsburg for 20 years, 1760 to 1780, and to remind myself, where would I have been otherwise? Where might the design of my mansion house, Monticello, have been had I not acquired those first 2 books on architecture from a stall that sat out from the old college building at William and Mary? Mr. James Gibbs' book on architecture, Mr. Robert Morris's select book on architecture, to have seen therein, in those plates, my idea of what I'd like to favor seated on the top of my little mountain, Monticello. Auden, you're correct. So much was established for me there during those 20 years, as it was for so many others, that I doubt I could have lived my life fully for the benefit of others in particular, except having those privileges at Williamsburg. Thank you for asking me that. It certainly is most profound in my reflections.
Well, we're reaching the end of our time, so one more thing to ask you as we're reflecting. How do you think history will remember the importance of Williamsburg and the significant events that occurred there?
I think the importance is for history not to forget Williamsburg, Virginia. And in that, I mean distinctly that we should ponder, would anything that occurred in Philadelphia have occurred if it did not begin first in Williamsburg? We just discussed how so much in my life came about and occurred because of my experience in Williamsburg. But have we thought the same about our nation? Remember when the royal governor of Virginia, John Murray, the Earl of Dunmore, dissolved the Virginia House of Burgesses at spring of 1774. The Burgesses would not remain dissolved. They met the very next day in the Raleigh Tavern there in the Apollo Room, and they called for an American Congress, an American Parliament, if you choose, not to have it their way and meet in Williamsburg, nor to allow it to occur in Boston, because after all, we were arguing the fact that the Port of Boston had been closed because of that so-called Tea Party that occurred the previous December. No, we decided in Williamsburg, let us seek gathering midway between the North and the South in the largest English city in North America, Philadelphia. And that, as the call went out, is where we gathered that September 1774. And then let us look at several years beyond that, in the spring of 1776. Let us not forget that it was in Williamsburg, Virginia, in that old House of Burgesses, on May 15th, 1776, when the old Virginia House of Burgesses voted on the resolution for independency. I quote, that these colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. On that day, the old colony of Virginia became the new Commonwealth of Virginia. And that resolution was brought 300 miles northwards to Philadelphia. It was read in that extension of the Second Congress, read by our countryman in Virginia, Colonel Richard Henry Lee. I believe it was the 7th of June, reiterating boldly that statement I just made about the colonies becoming new states. And that is what provoked President Hancock to create the entire Continental Congress, a committee of the whole, in proper parliamentary procedure, rule of law, and then to support their argument and debate over the resolution of Virginia, President Hancock appointed another committee of 5 men to draft our Declaration of American Independence. Never forget, the Declaration was not a fait accompli. It was to support the argument and debates of that committee of the whole, the entire Continental Congress. And towards the end of June, as they argued and debated that resolution of Virginia, and finally voted in accepting that, the true birthday of our nation, July the 2nd, 1776, they then continued on the 3rd and 4th to argue and debate our Declaration. And that's how we became a nation. But never forget where it was all spurred and where it began. I cannot. Williamsburg, Virginia. Most privileged to have enjoyed 20 years there as a young man. It will ever remain in my heart and in my soul. I thank all of you for this opportunity that we could gather today. I look forward for the next opportunity, if not here in Williamsburg, at other places, perhaps around our Commonwealth, around our country. And who's to say we cannot travel together to La Belle France, to the Italies, to England, perhaps all the way up, visit Rotterdam, The Hague, Amsterdam, sail up the Rhine. Who's to say? If we can think about it and conceive it, it is philosophy that we can manifest and bring us there. I remain your humble and obedient servant, Thomas Jefferson. Godspeed.